A man kept his daughters locked away for a decade, not in a dungeon, not in some faraway prison, but in their own home. Their screams muffled, their lives erased, hidden behind the whitewashed walls that everyone trusted. No one suspected, no one intervened. And yet, this horror was real. This was Greene County, Iowa, 1812, a place of snow-dusted fields, quiet roads, and neighbors who thought they knew everything until they didn't. Elias Langston was the father. To the world, he was a man of principle, a skilled carpenter, a pillar of the community, polite, respectable, unassuming, but appearances lie. Beneath his calm exterior, he was constructing a prison, a system of control so meticulous that no one, not his neighbors, not the town, not even his own daughters at first, could see it coming. Anna and Margaret, his two young daughters, were everything a family in this era should be: obedient, cheerful, and seemingly safe. Yet their lives would soon be turned into a living nightmare, one measured in years of silence, fear, and manipulation. This is a story of trust weaponized, of love twisted into chains, and of a darkness that thrived right beside the very people who could have stopped it. Before we go further, I need you to do one thing. If this is the first time you're here and you crave hidden truths, forbidden knowledge, and stories of the macabre that pierce the veil of everyday life, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell now. You will need every revelation that follows, and subscribing ensures you won't miss a single descent into the horrors that lurk in plain sight. Tonight we begin a journey into secrets erased from memory. You will not leave unchanged. You will question everything you think you know about trust, family, and safety, and once you hear the truth of the Langston family, you will never see a quiet farmhouse or the people behind it the same way again. Elias Langston's house appeared ordinary. From the outside, smoke rose from the chimney, chickens clucked in the yard, and the snow crunched under the boots of occasional visitors. Inside, everything was different. Every creak of the floorboards, every locked cabinet, every careful glance from Elias was part of a larger design, a design meant to control, to dominate, to erase. Anna and Margaret didn't know it yet, but their world was shrinking day by day, hour by hour, under the guise of paternal care. Elias had begun with small, subtle measures. A cancelled trip here, a postponed visit there, always justified as protection or necessity. "The world is dangerous," he said. "You must stay close. You must obey. Only then will I keep you safe." At first his daughters believed him. They thought it was grief for their mother, a natural desire to protect. But every decision Elias made, every word he spoke, was a carefully constructed step in a plan that would eventually imprison them completely. He watched them constantly, eyes cold yet calculating, noting every reaction, every small defiance, every question that flickered across their faces. The questions that should have been answered with patience and care were met with sudden fury, icy silence, or subtle threats. The girls learned quickly. One wrong word, one unguarded glance, could provoke his wrath. Slowly, invisibly, Elias was teaching them the language of fear, of compliance, of submission. And he was patient, incredibly patient. This was not a man acting in a moment of madness. This was a man with time, with precision, with obsession. He measured the days, mapped the movements of neighbors, noted the moments when the rural roads were empty. Every interaction was a test, every outing a calculated risk. The very safety of the community, the trust they placed in him, became his shield. No one would question the acties, ons, of a man they respected. By the time winter turned to spring, Anna and Margaret were isolated in ways subtle enough to seem natural. Visits were cancelled, letters ignored, neighbors gently kept at a distance by polite excuses. Their world had shrunk from sunlit fields and schoolrooms to the measured spaces of the house. The cracks of control widened daily, yet no one outside noticed, because no one outside could see the cage forming. This is the first lesson Elias Langston wanted his daughters to learn. Fear does not need walls. Fear does not need chains. Fear can be invisible, psychological, silent. And by the time the trap closes, the prey no longer dreams of freedom, only of survival. Beneath the Langston home the air was damp and heavy. The cellar was little more than packed earth and rough timber beams, a place meant for storing grain and salted meat. But Elias had other plans. By lantern light he worked in silence, chiseling, hammering, reinforcing walls that no neighbor would ever see. Each night after his daughters had gone to bed, he descended the narrow steps and continued his secret construction brick by brick, nail by nail. To anyone else it was nothing, just a man improving his property. But every blow of the hammer was an act of premeditated cruelty. Every wooden beam he set into place was a promise that his daughters' lives would no longer belong to them. They would be hidden, contained, erased. The basement would not be a storage room. It would be a cage. Anna was the first to notice something strange. She asked why her father spent so many nights in the cellar. Elias smiled, too quickly, too thinly, and told her it was men's work, nothing for her to worry about. Margaret, younger, more trusting, believed him, but Anna felt the unease growing. She would hear the scraping of tools, the thud of wood against earth, the slow rhythm of building long after midnight. And then came the tests. Elias began ordering them into the cellar for longer periods, first under the pretense of fetching supplies, then for chores, then simply because he commanded it. The space grew darker, more oppressive with each visit. The girls felt it before they understood it. This was not a place of safety. This was a place meant to consume them. He started locking the cellar door at odd times, at first only for minutes, then for hours. He claimed it was for their protection, a way to keep them from wandering, from danger, from temptation, but the truth was written in his eyes, in the way he listened to the sound of them pounding on the wood, testi burs, ting how long it would take before their cries broke into silence. And when they did grow silent, when the girls sat in darkness with only their breath and the drip of water from the beams above, Elias knew his design was working. He was no longer just their father, he was their jailer. This was not discipline. This was not protection. This was rehearsal. The real captivity had not yet begun, but it was coming. And once the trap was fully sprung, escape would be impossible. The day it became permanent was deceptively ordinary. The sun rose pale and cold over Greene County, the fields still crusted with frost, the neighbors going about their lives unaware. Inside the Langston home, Anna and Margaret woke expecting another day of chores, of silence, of their father's looming shadow. But Elias had already decided, today, they would no longer walk free. He told them it was a lesson in obedience. "You must learn to stay where I put you," he said, voice calm but edged with steel. He led them to the cellar, his lantern flickering against the earthen walls. At first they obeyed without resistance, thinking it would be another test, an hour, maybe two, before he released them. But when the heavy wooden door shut above them with a final thud and the iron bolt scraped into place, they knew this was different. Hours passed, then a day, then another. The girls cried, shouted, pounded on the door until their fists bruised. Their voices grew hoarse, breaking into whispers, then silence. No one came. No one heard. The farmhouse was too isolated and the cellar too deep. Elias returned only to deliver scraps of food, a jug of water, always without a word. His silence was deliberate, his absence a weapon. He wanted them to understand that their world had narrowed to this space, that resistance meant nothing, that no one would save them. Anna tried to comfort Margaret, wrapping her arms around her sister in the darkness. She whispered promises, that this couldn't last, that their father would change, that someone would notice. But Anna's own heart trembled with doubt. She could feel the walls pressing in, the damp air seeping into her bones. This was not temporary. This was a sentence. And above them, Elias lived his life as though nothing had changed. He greeted neighbors with polite nods, sold his carpentry with practiced ease, and maintained the image of a man burdened only by the loss of his wife. To the world, Elias Langston was respectable. Inside his home, he was a tyrant. The basement was no longer a room. It was their world, a world of stone, of wood, of silence. And every day spent in the dark chipped away at the girls' hope. It would not be long before their fear turned into something else, obedience, submission, the slow erasure of self. exactly as Elias intended. This was the true beginning of their 10-year captivity. Days melted into each other inside the cellar. At first, Anna and Margaret tried to count them, scratches on the wood, whispers in the dark, a rhythm to mark the passing of time. But Elias knew how to strip even that away. Sometimes he left them in silence for what felt like an eternity, offering no food, no light, no sound of footsteps overhead. Other times he would burst in suddenly, lantern blazing, voice sharp, ordering them to obey some meaningless command, just to remind them that their world was his to control. Sleep became a weapon. He woke them at random hours, dragged them from the floor to stand shivering against the wall, berating them for imagined sins. Then, without warning, he would vanish again, leaving them in darkness until exhaustion collapsed their bodies. They never knew when he would come, what mood he would bring, what punishment he might inflict. The unpredictability was the cruelty. Fear became constant, a second heartbeat inside them. Anna fought it at first. She whispered to Margaret about escape, about running to the neighbors, about the world beyond the cellar. But her words grew weaker with each passing week. Hunger gnawed at them, sleep broke them, silence hollowed them. Margaret, younger and more impressionable, began to repeat her father's phrases, his rules, his warnings, his twisted logic. Anna watched her sister's faith in freedom dim like the last embers of a fire. And Elias noticed. He studied their reactions the way a scientist dissects his subject. A raised voice here, a false kindness there, each carefully measured to see what broke them and what bound them tighter. He was molding them, reshaping their thoughts, turning them from daughters into prisoners who no longer dreamed of release. Outside, the community saw only the same calm man they had always known. He laughed at the tavern, traded goods with a steady hand, and neither once gave a reason for suspicion. No one asked about Anna and Margaret. No one wondered why the once lively girls were never seen. Elias had buried them in plain sight, and the earth itself seemed complicit in their silence. Weeks passed, then months. Time was no longer a line for Anna and Margaret. It was a circle, endless and suffocating. Morning and night became indistinguishable, measured only by the sound of Elias's boots on the cellar steps. And this was his triumph, not just imprisoning their bodies, but eroding their sense of reality itself. The cellar had become their universe. Yet even in universes built on fear, cracks form. Anna was the older sister, the protector, the one who remembered more of the world outside. She clung to those memories, the sunlight on wheat fields, the laughter of other children, the church bells on Sunday mornings. They became her secret rebellion, sparks in the darkness she refused to let Elias extinguish. Margaret, though, was slipping. She repeated Elias's words like prayers. The world is dangerous. Father protects us. Father knows best. At first, Anna tried to correct her, whispering in the dark that these were lies, that they must hold on, that one day they would escape. But Margaret's eyes would widen with fear, and she'd beg Anna not to say such things. The fear of Elias ran deeper in her veins now than the hope of freedom. Anna realized then that resistance could not be spoken aloud. It had to be hidden, carved into silence. So when Elias left scraps of food or water, she began saving tiny fragments, bits of bread, drops of water, concealing them beneath loose stones in the cellar wall. It was not enough to survive an escape, not yet. But it was proof to herself that she still had a choice, that she had not surrendered completely. Elias noticed the shift. He always noticed. His eyes lingered longer on Anna, his punishments harsher, his silences colder. One evening he dragged her by the wrist into the lantern's glow and forced her to recite his rules. Obey, be silent, be grateful. When she faltered, he struck her, not in rage but with calculated precision, enough to bruise, enough to remind. Margaret wept in the corner, whispering apologies, as though her sister's defiance endangered them both. But the bruise was more than pain to Anna. It was proof that she was still resisting, proof that her spirit had not been broken, no matter how deep the cellar, no matter how heavy the silence. Above them the seasons changed. Spring turned to summer, summer to autumn. Life in Greene County rolled on, Neighbors plowed fields, children played in meadows, women gathered at market, and no one knew that beneath one farmhouse, two girls lived in a cage built not of stone, but of fear. Elias believed he had silenced them. What he did not know, what he could not yet see, was that silence is never empty. Sometimes silence is the place where rebellion takes root. Elias understood a cruel truth. Captivity alone was not enough. To break his daughters completely, he needed to fracture the bond between them. Together, Anna and Margaret could resist, whisper hope, share strength. Divided, they would become pliable, malleable, tools of his will. It began with punishments tailored to comparison. When Anna disobeyed, he fed Margaret generously in front of her, rewarding obedience with scraps of kindness. When Margaret faltered, he praised Anna, planting seeds of resentment in the younger girl's fragile heart. Neither sister wanted these rewards, but hunger gnawed louder than conscience, and soon the lines blurred. The cellar became not just a prison, but a battleground of survival. Then came isolation. Elias would take Margaret upstairs for hours, leaving Anna alone in the cellar's suffocating dark. The silence pressed against her like a living thing, each creak of the house above a reminder of her helplessness. She imagined what was happening, words being twisted, trust being poisoned, Elias weaving lies about her disobedience. When Margaret returned, she was quieter, eyes downcast, lips trembling with secrets she dared not share. Other times, Elias reversed it. He would drag Anna upstairs and confront her with accusations. "Your sister says you defy me. Your sister says you want to leave. Do you not love her? Do you not love me?" His voice was calm, almost tender, but his eyes burned with a fanatic's conviction. Anna never admitted guilt, but her silence, her refusal to betray Margaret, was twisted into proof of her defiance. The cellar's darkness grew heavier between the sisters. Once they had whispered together, comforting one another against the shadows. Now they sat apart, each haunted by the suspicion that Elias had poisoned the other's mind. Margaret cried often, whispering that they must obey, that father only wanted to protect them. Anna bit her lip until it bled, knowing that Margaret was being reshaped into the very weapon Elias needed. It was a cruel brilliance. Elias did not need chains of iron when he could forge chains of mistrust, and as the months bled into years, the bond of sisterhood, the one thing that could have been their salvation, was slowly, deliberately eroded. In Greene County, neighbors still waved to Elias as he passed, still called him a man of virtue. They never saw the cracks beneath his mask. They never heard the silence in his home, a silence heavier than any grave. And beneath it all, two girls learned that sometimes the cruelest prison is not the one built of wood and stone, but the one built inside the mind. By the second year of captivity, Elias's cruelty had evolved into ritual. It was not enough for his daughters to obey. He demanded they perform their obedience, reciting it, embodying it, living it, until they no longer remembered who they had once been. Each morning he descended the cellar steps with his lantern, its glow casting his figure into a towering shadow. The ritual began the same way. Anna and Margaret were forced to stand barefoot on the cold earth, hands folded, heads bowed. Then Elias would command them to repeat his words, a litany of twisted truths he wanted carved into their minds. "I am safe because Father protects me. I am nothing without Father's guidance. The world outside is wicked. Obedience is survival. Silence is love." At first, Anna muttered the words with contempt, her voice flat, her eyes burning in defiance. Margaret, though, repeated them with trembling fervor, desperate to please, desperate to avoid punishment. Over time, the cadence of their voices became mechanical, as if their father were chiseling his will into their souls with every repetition. Disobedience during the ritual was met with punishment, sometimes denial of food, sometimes hours of kneeling in silence, sometimes the sting of his hand across their faces. But obedience brought no reward, only the absence of pain. That, Elias believed, was enough. He even imposed rituals of movement. Before eating, the girls had to bow 3 times, thanking him for his sacrifice. Before sleeping, they had to lie on the cold ground in silence for a full hour, eyes closed, as if in prayer. He was not merely imprisoning their bodies. He was training them, reshaping them into reflections of his own delusion. For Margaret, the rituals became normal, even comforting. She clung to them as if they were the only order in a collapsing world. But for Anna, each word spoken felt like betrayal. Betrayal of herself, of her sister, of the freedom she still dared to imagine. She mouthed the words, but in her mind she replaced them with others. I am Anna. I am more than this. I remember who I am. Still the rituals wore on them, day after day, month after month, until the line between resistance and surrender blurred, and the cellar felt less like a prison imposed and more like the only reality they had ever known. Above ground, the seasons turned again. Snow fell, melted, fell once more. Green County lived and breathed as though nothing had changed. But under the Langston home, time stood still, and Elias was winning. Rituals may have bent her body, but Anna refused to let them erase her mind. She understood something her younger sister did not, that survival was not only about enduring, it was about remembering. If Elias could strip away who they were, if he could make them forget themselves, then even escape would mean nothing. So Anna began a secret rebellion. With nails worn to the quick, she scratched faint marks into the cellar walls. A line for each day, a small symbol for each season. When Elias demanded silence, she whispered stories to Margaret in the dark. Stories of their mother's laughter, of sunlight in the fields, of the taste of warm bread on market day. At first, Margaret resisted, trembling and begging her to stop. He'll hear us, she whispered. He'll punish us. But Anna persisted, planting fragments of memory like seeds. When Margaret cried, Anna pressed her hand to the cellar floor and whispered, "This is not the world, this is only the cage." To hide her defiance, Anna wove her rebellion into Elias's rituals. When she recited his twisted phrases, she changed the rhythm in her mind, replacing words with truth. Obedience is survival, became resistance is survival. Silence is love, became silence is strategy. Elias never noticed the shift, but to Anna, it was everything. One night, when Elias locked them away without food, Anna pulled Margaret close and showed her the scratched markings on the wall. At first, Margaret's eyes widened in terror, but then, as Anna traced the faint lines with her fingertip, Margaret's lips trembled into the ghost of a smile. She understood. The marks were proof that time still existed, that their lives still belonged to them. Still, the rebellion was dangerous. Elias inspected the cellar often, running his hands along the walls, searching for signs of defiance. Anna hid her scratches beneath shadows, behind loose stones, in places, as his lantern light rarely reached. Each night she risked everything to preserve the truth. Above them, Elias lived untouched by suspicion. His carpentry thrived, his reputation remained untarnished. To the town, he was the picture of control, discipline, and order. But beneath his home, his daughters were carving their own order, one hidden mark at a time. Anna did not yet know if escape was possible. She did not know if freedom would ever come, but she knew this. As long as she could mark the passing of time, as long as she could keep Margaret remembering, Elias had not fully won. In darkness, resistance lived, silent, patient, waiting. Elias had always prided himself on his ability to see through silence. He believed every flicker of an eye, every hesitation of breath, revealed more truth than words. And soon he began to notice that Anna's silence was not the silence he demanded. It was not broken, it was not empty. It carried something dangerous, something he had not permitted: will. Margaret bent quickly, obeyed without question, flinched at his footsteps. But Anna, she looked at him differently, not with open defiance. That would have been simple to crush. Her defiance was quieter, buried, but alive. The kind of defiance that grows roots in the dark. And Elias knew roots must be cut before they split stone. So he invented a new form of torment, one designed not for the body, but for the spirit. He began what he called the mirror ritual. In the cellar, he dragged down a tall, cracked mirror from the attic. He set it against the stone wall and forced Anna to kneel before it. "Look," he commanded. "Look until you no longer recognize yourself." He made her stare for hours, whispering over her reflection. You are nothing without me. You are nothing without me. You are nothing without me. When Anna tried to look away, he gripped her hair, forcing her eyes back to the glass. When she refused to speak, he spoke for her, mimicking her voice, saying the words he demanded. I belong to you. I am yours. He would laugh softly after each session, as though he were an artist perfecting his creation. Margaret watched in terror, too afraid to intervene. But Anna understood the trap. Elias was not simply trying to imprison their bodies. He was trying to shatter their sense of self, to make them question whether their reflections, their thoughts, even their names truly belonged to them anymore. When the sessions ended, Anna would lie on the cellar floor, shaking. But in the stillness afterward, she clung to a sigh. Truth. The more he tried to erase her, the more certain she became that he feared her. If she was truly broken, he would not need the mirror. The ritual itself was proof of her strength. But Elias was patient. He believed all wills could be broken if given enough time, and Anna knew something she dared not tell Margaret. His patience was infinite. Margaret had always been the gentler one, the softer voice, the easier heart. As the weeks of torment stretched into months, the cracks began to show. At first it was small, her hands trembling when Elias entered, her eyes refusing to meet Anna's when she whispered old memories. But soon the fractures widened into something darker. Margaret began repeating his words, not under duress, not only during the rituals. She whispered them to herself in the dark, rocking on the cellar bed as if the chants brought her comfort. Silence is safety. Silence is love. Father knows best. The very phrases Elias had carved into their lives began to take root in Margaret's own mouth. Anna tried to intervene. She shook her sister, whispered furiously, "Don't say his words. They are poison. They are not yours." But Margaret pulled away, her eyes wide and frightened. "If I repeat them," she whispered, "he hurts me less. Don't you see? Maybe if I believe them, the pain will stop." That was the moment Anna's resolve nearly broke, because she understood the cruelty of Elias's design. He did not need both daughters to resist. He only needed one to surrender. One sister broken was enough to weaken the other. Divide them, and he would rule them both. The next time Elias descended, Margaret obeyed instantly. She knelt without being told. She recited without hesitation. Anna saw the faint smile cross her father's lips, the kind of smile that chilled more than any beating. He was winning, not with chains or hunger, but with belief. He had begun to carve Margaret into his creation. That night, Anna held her sister tightly as she sobbed, whispering stories of their mother, of freedom, of sunlight. But Margaret pushed her away, muttering, "Stop. Stop reminding me. It only makes it hurt more." Anna lay awake for hours, staring at the cellar ceiling, realizing she was in a war on two fronts. Again, against Elias's control, and against her sister's slow surrender. It was then Anna made a vow, silent but fierce. If she could not save herself, she would at least save Margaret. Even if it meant sacrificing her own sanity, her own body, she would hold on to enough truth for both of them. Because if both of them forgot who they were, Elias truly would win. And Anna could not allow him that victory. Elias Hensley understood the human heart better than any priest, doctor, or scholar. He knew its deepest weakness, the terror of choosing between love and survival. That was the lever he began to pull. One night, he carried a small wooden box into the cellar. Its hinges creaked as he opened it, revealing two objects laid side by side on a scrap of velvet, a silver spoon and a leather strap. The girls stared at them, confused, until he spoke. "You will take turns," he said calmly, as though teaching a lesson in etiquette. "One of you will choose the spoon, the other the strap. The one who chooses the strap will use it on her sister. If you refuse, you both go without food. If you both refuse, the punishment doubles. You will learn that choice is power, and power is mine to grant." Margaret's lip quivered. Anna's fists clenched. Neither reached for the box. Elias only smiled. "Then you will starve." He carried the box back upstairs, and for 2 days no food touched their lips. On the third night, their hunger gnawed so fiercely it drowned out every thought. When Elias appeared again, the box gleaming in his hands, Anna's stomach twisted with betrayal. Because Margaret's hand shot out before she could stop her, Margaret seized the spoon. The strap was left for Anna. Her sister's eyes begged her for forgiveness, even as Elias ordered her to swing. "Only 3 lashes," he said, with the warmth of a father setting boundaries. "Show me obedience, and I'll show you mercy." Anna raised the strap with trembling hands. Margaret bowed her head, already crying. The cellar seemed to close in on them, the air thick with silence and Elias's watchful gaze. When Anna struck, the sound was louder than she imagined, raw leather cracking against flesh. Margaret cried out, and the sound burrowed deep into Anna's soul. She dropped the strap after the first strike, shaking her head. "No, no more." But Elias only chuckled, retrieving the strap and delivering the remaining lashes himself. "Do you see?" he whispered to Anna as Margaret writhed on the floor. "You will always choose. Even when you refuse, you choose." That night, Anna curled beside her sister, both of them broken in different ways. Margaret whispered through tears, "I'm sorry. I couldn't starve anymore." And though Anna held her and promised forgiveness, she realized Elias had achieved his goal. The seed of betrayal had been planted, and once planted, it would grow. The ritual of spoon and strap was only the beginning. Elias understood the dark art of escalation. Once a boundary was crossed, it could never be returned to, only stretched further, until the soul itself tore apart. The next time he descended with the wooden box, the spoon was gone. In its place lay 2 straps, one thick, one thin. He set them on the cellar floor between the sisters, his voice calm, deliberate. "One of you chooses the lighter pain, the other the heavier. Decide quickly." Anna froze, her heart pounding so hard it felt like thunder in her ears. Margaret's eyes darted between the straps, panic flooding her face. When neither moved, Elias crouched low, his face close to theirs. "Hesitation is betrayal. To me, to each other. Choose." Margaret snatched the thinner strap. Anna's stomach lurched. Once again, her sister's instinct was survival, leaving her the heavier burden. Elias's smile widened as he placed the thick strap in Anna's hands. "Good. Now show me loyalty. Pain is the currency of truth. Spend it well." Anna obeyed. She had no choice. But every strike she delivered tore a piece of herself away. Margaret's sobs echoed through the cellar, and Elias drank them in like wine. When the punishment ended, he left the straps behind, tossed carelessly in the corner like discarded tools. It was not the beatings that haunted Anna most. It was the way Margaret began to look at her differently, no longer as a sister, but as a betrayer, an executioner. Elias had succeeded in something far worse than bruises. He had planted suspicion. Days blurred together, each ritual twisting tighter. Sometimes Elias forced them to confess secrets, real or imagined, punishing the one who spoke too little. Other times he offered scraps of food to whichever sister proved more loyal. Each game ended the same way, one broken, the other complicit. One night after Elias Langston, both them shivering on the floor, Margaret whispered through cracked lips, "I don't hate you. I hate him. But sometimes, when you strike me, I can't tell the difference." Anna's heart shattered. She wanted to scream that it wasn't her choice, that Elias had forced her hand, but deep down, she knew Margaret's words held truth. Elias had infected their bond, turning love into suspicion, loyalty into fear. And that was the cruelest victory of all. Anna realized that survival, as Elias defined it, was nothing but a slow march toward destruction. If she continued to play his games, she would lose Margaret entirely, and herself with her. Endurance alone was no longer enough. She needed something Elias did not expect, resistance born not of defiance, but of strategy. She began small. When Elias demanded confessions, she offered half-truths, weaving them into believable lies. Stories about dreams she never had, sins she never committed. At first she feared discovery, but Elias seemed satisfied, his pride blinding him to her subtle rebellion. Each false confession was a seed of resistance, proof that he did not own all of her. Margaret, however, remained fragile. She obeyed quickly, her eyes dull, her voice trembling. Anna could see that her sister was slipping further away, clinging to Elias's rules as though they offered protection. Anna knew that to reach her, she needed to become not only her sister, but her shield. So when Elias forced them into another ritual of choice, this time offering bread to one and punishment to the other, Anna acted. Before Margaret could speak, Anna volunteered. "Give her the bread, I'll take the punishment." The lashings burned, but Anna endured them silently, her eyes fixed on her sister. Margaret sobbed, refusing the bread at first, but Elias forced it into her hands. "Eat," he ordered coldly. "Your sister chose this for you." That night, Margaret clung to Anna as they lay curled together on the cold floor. Between her tears, she whispered, "Why would you do that? Why suffer for me?" Anna stroked her hair gently, her voice steady. "Because you're mine to protect, and no matter what he makes us do, you are still my sister." Something shifted in Margaret then, small, fragile, but real. The next day, when Elias demanded another confession, Margaret hesitated. Instead of parroting his words, she whispered, "I have none." The defiance was tiny, but to Anna it was monumental. Elias's face darkened and punishment followed swiftly, but Anna saw it, the faint spark of rebellion returning to her sister's eyes. For the first time in months, Anna felt the stirrings of hope. Elias had underestimated them. He believed he had broken them, but he had only forced them into a deeper bond, one forged not in obedience, but in secret defiance. Anna vowed that night, if escape was impossible, then resistance would become their legacy. Elias Hensley was not a man easily deceived. His cruelty was not blind rage, but calculation, and calculation meant he studied every detail. He noticed the subtle shifts, the way Anna no longer flinched as easily, the way Margaret's eyes carried a flicker of defiance when she thought he wasn't looking. These were cracks in his design, and Elias despised cracks. One evening, he entered the cellar with no box, no straps, no bread. Instead, he carried a small iron cage. Inside, something shifted, a faint scratching, the sound of claws against metal. The sisters stared, unease tightening their chests. Elias set the cage down with a deliberate thud. "Resistance," he said softly, "is a disease, and diseases must be cut out." He knelt beside the cage and slid open a narrow slot. From within, a black rat darted against the bars, its teeth gnashing, its eyes wild. Margaret recoiled instantly, but Elias caught her chin, forcing her to look. "This creature lives on hunger, on survival. It has no illusions of love, no foolish loyalty. It understands the truth I've been trying to teach you, that in the end, there is only the stronger and the weaker. One feeds, the other is fed upon." The sisters trembled as he drew a cruel smile. "Tonight, you will learn." He explained the rules with a chilling calm. One sister would hold the cage against the other's skin, while Elias lifted the latch. The rat, desperate and starving, would claw and bite, seeking escape. The one who inflicted the terror would be spared further punishment. The one who refused, she would endure both rat and lash. Anna's heart thundered. This was no longer about hunger or bruises. This was terror made flesh. Margaret shook her head violently, tears already streaming, but Elias only stood back, folding his arms as though watching a play he had written. Anna realized in that instant that Elias had grown aware of the betrayal bond, and this was his answer, to turn their love into a battlefield, to make them not only tools, but weapons against one another. She stepped forward, her voice steady though her body trembled. "I'll do it." Elias's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, mistaking her choice for surrender. But inside, Anna's mind was already racing. She would not let the rat harm her sister. If anyone was to suffer, it would be her. Better she endure the horror than let Margaret be broken again. For the first time, Anna was no longer just surviving. She was preparing to fight. Elias placed the cage into Anna's hands, his gaze sharp and expectant. The iron felt heavier than it should have, the frantic scratching inside vibrating against her skin. Margaret whimpered, reaching for her sister, but Anna shook her head ever so slightly. "Trust me," her eyes seemed to say. Elias gestured coldly. "Against her stomach, now." Anna lifted the cage, her arms trembling, not from weakness, but from the unbearable choice before her. Margaret shrank back, pressing herself against the stone wall, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. Elias's hand moved toward the latch. "Do it, Anna. Show me what love is worth when fear commands it." For one fleeting second, Anna imagined obeying. She imagined pressing the cage into Margaret's body, hearing the scream, watching her sister break all over again. Elias would smile, his lesson would be complete. But then something inside Anna snapped. She spun the cage, slamming it against her own bare stomach. The metal bars seared cold against her skin as she shouted, "Here, on me!" Elias froze, surprised. The rat screeched as the latch clicked open. A blur of fur and claws exploded against Anna's flesh. Pain ripped through her body as teeth tore into her side, hot blood running down her waist. Margaret screamed, reaching toward her, but Anna held firm, her eyes locked on Elias. She did not cry out, she did not beg. She gritted her teeth and whispered through the agony, "You don't own me." For the first time, Elias faltered. His mask of calm cracked, if only for a heartbeat. He had designed this ritual to shatter the sisters' bond, to prove love was weakness. Yet Anna had turned it into a weapon, pain transformed into defiance, sacrifice into strength. When he finally yanked the rat away, Anna collapsed to her knees, blood staining the cellar floor. Margaret wrapped her arms around her, sobbing uncontrollably. Elias stood in the shadows, silent, his expression unreadable. But in that silence, Anna knew she had shifted something. He had not broken her, not yet. And as long as she could choose pain for herself instead of her sister, he never would. That night, as Margaret pressed torn cloth against the wounds, she whispered, "You'll die if you keep doing this." Anna's voice was weak but steady. "Then I'll die protecting you, and he'll never win." For the first time, Elias's empire of fear had met resistance not with obedience, but with fire. Elias Hensley was not a man who tolerated defiance. Anna's act with the cage had not only ruined his ritual, it had humiliated him. But Elias was patient. Where brute force failed, manipulation would thrive. He would not break Anna's body, he would rot her mind. The next evening he came without straps, cages, or rats. Instead he carried a mirror, tall, framed in black wood, its surface clouded with dust. He placed it against the cellar wall, facing the sisters as they sat trembling in the corner. "You believe you are strong," he said softly, his voice almost tender. "But strength is nothing more than delusion. Tonight, you will see yourselves as you truly are." He forced Margaret to stand before the mirror first. The dim lantern light flickered across her pale, gaunt reflection. Elias whispered in her ear, voice dripping with venom, "Look at you. Hollow, weak, nothing without me. Even your sister sees it. She carries the pain because she knows you cannot." Margaret sobbed, pressing her hands against the glass as if she might claw her way into a different body. Anna tried to call out, but Elias silenced her with a single glance. Then it was Anna's turn. Elias positioned her before the mirror and spoke with surgical precision. "You call yourself protector, savior. But what do you see? A liar, a hypocrite. You strike your sister with your own hand. You choose her pain every time you hesitate. You are not her salvation. You are her prison." Anna's throat tightened. For a moment she did see it. The reflection of a monster wearing her face, her hands stained with Margaret's bruises and blood. Her knees buckled and she turned away, but Elias seized her by the hair, forcing her gaze back to the glass. Look at what you've become. If you truly loved her, you'd end it. But you won't, because you're as selfish as the man you claim to hate." When he finally released her, Anna crumpled to the floor, shaking. The lashes and cages had hurt, yes, but this was something deeper. A wound carved into the soul, harder to resist, harder to heal. Margaret crawled to her side, clutching her hand, whispering, "Don't listen, don't believe him." But Anna could not silence the echo of Elias's words. For the first time, doubt crept into her heart, not about Elias, but about herself. And that was exactly the victory Elias craved. That night, the cellar was quieter than ever. Anna lay curled on the stone floor, her body trembling not from pain but from the poison Elias had poured into her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, the mirror appeared again, showing her not a sister, but a monster. The image gnawed at her, clawing away at the fragile walls she had built to survive. Margaret, weak as she was, refused to sleep. She watched Anna's chest rise and fall, watched the twitch in her jaw as if she were fighting invisible enemies. At last, Margaret crawled closer, pressing her forehead against her sister's shoulder. "Listen to me," she whispered, her voice hoarse but urgent. "He's lying. He twists everything. That's all he does. You are not my prison. You are the only reason I'm still alive." Anna shook her head, covering her face with bloody, trembling hands. "You don't understand. I saw it. I saw what I've done to you. Every strike, every scream. I'm no better than him." Margaret seized her wrists, pulling her hands away. For the first time in months, her eyes burned not with fear, but with fire. "No, you're not him. You took the blows. You bled for me. You chose pain when I couldn't. If that makes you a monster, then what am I? Because without you, I would have given up long ago." Anna's lips parted, her chest heaving, but no words came. Margaret pressed on, her grip fierce despite her frail body. "He wants you to believe his words, because if you believe them, he wins. Don't you see? You're the strong one, Anna, but strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means letting someone else hold you when you do." For the first time, Anna saw her sister not as fragile or fading, but as a mirror of her own courage. Margaret, the one Elias had called weak, was now anchoring her. Anna's tears finally fell, silent and uncontrollable. Margaret pulled her close, whispering over and over, "He doesn't opt on us. Not you, not me. We are still ours." It was not victory. It was not escape. But in that moment the sisters had done something Elias never intended. They had reversed the roles. Anna had carried Margaret for so long, but now it was Margaret who carried Anna, if only for a night. And that single act of shared strength would ripple far beyond the cellar walls. Elias had lived too long inside the theater of cruelty to miss subtle changes. He noticed the difference in Margaret almost immediately, the way her eyes no longer dropped quite as quickly, the way she lingered closer to Anna as though she had finally found her voice. That small defiance was intolerable. On the 7th night after the mirror ritual, Elias descended the cellar steps carrying nothing. No straps, no spoons, no cages. His hands alone were enough. The absence of tools was more terrifying than their presence. He stood before the sisters, his shadow stretching across the stone wall. "You think you've discovered strength," he murmured, "but strength is worthless without proof. Tonight, one of you will prove loyalty." The sisters exchanged a glance, dread flooding their veins. Elias's smile was thin, deliberate. "I will ask one of you to choose. The other will suffer, and the one who chooses will eat." Anna felt her stomach twist violently. It wasn't hunger that burned her, it was the trap she could already see forming. Elias turned to Margaret first. Your sister suffers, or you starve. Which is it?" Margaret's breath caught. Anna shook her head, whispering urgently, "Don't answer. Don't play his game." But Elias leaned closer, his voice dripping poison. "Choose her pain, and you'll taste bread for the first time in days. Refuse, and both of you starve until one breaks." Margaret trembled, torn between instinct and loyalty. Her lips quivered, but then she met Anna's eyes. Something in her steadied. "No," she whispered. "I won't choose." Elias's expression hardened, but he pivoted smoothly, turning his venom on Anna. "Then you protect her. You carry her burdens, don't you? Prove it. Choose her pain instead of yours. Prove that your strength is not just words." Anna's blood ran cold. He had twisted the knife perfectly. If she refused, Margaret would starve with her. If she agreed, Margaret would suffer, and Elias would brand her as the executioner once more. For a long moment, silence thickened the cellar. Margaret clutched Anna's hand, whispering, "Don't, please don't let him win." Elias's eyes glittered, waiting. It was no longer about lashes or hunger. It was about ownership, about forcing one sister to believe she had damned the other. Anna realized with sick clarity, this was his masterpiece, not pain of the body, but pain of the soul. And yet, somewhere inside her, a thought began to form, a dangerous, desperate thought. Anna's heart pounded so violently she thought Elias might hear it. The cellar seemed to narrow around them, the flicker of the lantern casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. Elias waited, his hand resting casually on the latch of the cellar door, as if he already owned the outcome. But Anna's mind was racing. For months, she had been cornered by his choices, forced to surrender ground piece by piece. Tonight, for the first time, she saw a sliver of light. His entire system of cruelty depended on obedience to the rules he set. What if she broke the rules, not with refusal, but with corruption? She lifted her head slowly, meeting his eyes with a steadiness she didn't fully feel. "I'll choose," she said. Margaret gasped. "Anna, no." Anna tightened her grip on her sister's hand, silencing her without words. Then she turned back to Elias. "I choose her pain." The cellar went deathly still. Margaret recoiled in horror, betrayal flashing across her face. Elias's thin smile widened. He leaned down toward Anna, savoring her words like fine wine. At last, the mask cracks. The protector reveals herself. But Anna was not finished. Her voice, though trembling, grew sharper, stronger. "Yes, I choose her pain, because she is stronger than me, stronger than you'll ever admit. And every time you try to break her, she survives. So hurt her, starve her, do your worst. She will endure. And when she does, it will be you who looks weak, not us." The words hung in the air like a blade. Margaret's eyes widened, not with despair but with sudden understanding. She saw the spark of defiance beneath Anna's apparent betrayal. Elias faltered. Just for a second, his smile stiffened, his eyes narrowing. Her choice was obedience, yet laced with venom he had not scripted. He could not punish her without validating her defiance, and he could not ignore the rules he himself had set. For the first time, Anna had turned his theater of cruelty into her own stage. Elias finally straightened, his expression hard. "Very well," he said coldly. "Her pain it will be." He raised his hand toward Margaret, but something had shifted. The sisters clung to each other, not as victim and betrayer, but as co-conspirators. Elias would deliver the blow, yes, but he could not erase the truth Anna had spoken. That survival itself was rebellion, and rebellion had taken root. The blow came without warning. Elias's hand cracked across Margaret's face, the sound echoing off the cellar walls like a pistol shot. She stumbled against the stone, the lantern's flame quivering with the force of the moment. Blood welled at the corner of her lip, but she made no sound, no scream, no sob, only silence. Anna lunged toward her sister, but Elias shoved her back with brutal ease. His eyes burned, not with rage, but with the cold calculation of a man determined to prove he still ruled. "You think silence will save you," he hissed, standing over Margaret. "You think defiance will weaken me? No, children. Every moment you resist only makes my power stronger." But Margaret lifted her head. The lantern light caught her eyes, and for the first time Elias saw not fear, but fire. Her lip trembled from the pain, yet her voice was steady when she whispered, "Then you'll never break us, because you'll never stop trying, and that means you'll never be free either." The words cut deeper than the silence. For years Elias had told himself he was in control, the architect of this secret kingdom. But Margaret's words exposed the hidden chain. He was as much a prisoner of his obsession as they were of his cellar. Elias's hand froze in the air. For a moment, the mask slipped. Beneath the iron discipline of his face, Anna saw it. The flicker of doubt, the shadow of weariness. He quickly smothered it, forcing his voice back into steel. "Enough. You live because I allow it. You eat because I decide. Remember that." But the sisters exchanged a glance that said otherwise. The pain had not divided them. It had sealed them together, forged in defiance. Each strike Elias delivered now risked creating not obedience but unity. Two flames burning in the dark where he had meant to leave only ashes. As he stormed up the stairs, locking the heavy door behind him, Margaret leaned against Anna's shoulder, breathing hard. Her face stung, her body shook, but her spirit had not broken. And Anna whispered, her voice trembling but resolute, "He wanted to teach us fear. Instead, he taught us his weakness. We will outlast him." The seed of resistance had become something more, not just survival. A vow. The cellar became more than a prison. It became a battlefield of the mind. Elias still believed he commanded every breath, every heartbeat, but Margaret and Anna began weaving their rebellion in the only weapon left to them: silence. At first it was subtle. They withheld their reactions, refusing to give him the satisfaction of fear. When Elias demanded answers, they offered nothing but stillness. When he prowled the cellar, lantern in hand, their eyes followed him without a word, unsettling in their calm. The silence became heavier than screams, a mirror that forced Elias to hear only his own voice echoing back at him. Anna was the first to realize its effect. She whispered to Margaret when the door was locked, "He needs us to break. Every time we don't, he bends closer to the edge." Margaret nodded, her swollen lip curved in the faintest smile. Pain was still with her, but pain no longer frightened her. It fueled her. They began to invent rituals. Each night, when the lantern was extinguished, they clasped hands in the dark and recited their secret vow. "We endure. We endure together. He cannot touch what is ours." In that silence they rebuilt the pieces Elias had tried to shatter. But it was more than unity. It was strategy. Elias thrived on their despair. Now their refusal to collapse left him pacing above, sleepless, doubting. He had built the cellar to erase them, but it had begun erasing him instead. His obsession had no mirror, no reward, only the reflection of his own madness staring back through their unbroken eyes. The sisters whispered plans in the hours he thought them sleeping. They learned the rhythms of his visits, the creak of the stair when he carried food, the sound of the lock sliding. Anna, sharper in instinct, counted each key on the ring at his belt from memory. Margaret, patient and steady, studied the flicker of his lantern, how he shielded it with his hand when his grip trembled. They did not yet know how they would escape, but they knew something more dangerous. Elias was not invincible. He could bleed, he could doubt, he could fall. And as Margaret whispered in the pitch-black night, her words a knife in the silence, "Fear built this place, but fear can undo it too." Elias had once moved with the precision of a man certain of his dominion. Each step was measured, each word sharp and deliberate, but now something had shifted. The silence below gnawed at him. What had once been his weapon had turned traitor. He sat awake at his desk long into the night, ledger books open but unread, the ink on his pen drying to a clot. His hand trembled when he reached for the lantern. The shadows in the corners seemed thicker, as though listening, waiting. Every creak of the floorboards felt like an intrusion, a whisper of rebellion carried up from the cellar. When he descended the stairs, he found them sitting together, backs straight, hands folded in their laps. They did not cower. They did not cry. Their eyes followed him with a calmness that chilled him to the bone. They were not the children he had once silenced with threats and blows. They were something else now, something unyielding. He shouted once, demanding an answer, but his voice cracked. It echoed back to him like the voice of a stranger. He lifted his hand as if to strike again, but Margaret did not flinch. Instead, her gaze held his steady, and for a fleeting instant, Elias felt it. The unsettling thought that they were watching him just as much as he was watching them. That night, he paced the upstairs hallway like a caged animal. His servants noticed. The maids whispered that the master's temper had grown erratic, that his eyes darted to corners where nothing stood. He ordered them about with increasing violence, but the authority rang hollow, as though he shouted only to silence the voices in his own head. And when he tried to sleep, it was worse. The silence pressed in, heavy as chains. He swore he heard footsteps in the hall, soft as bare feet. He swore he heard whispers beneath the floorboards, words he could not make out, but words meant for him. The cellar, that had been his fortress of control, had become a hive of secrets, one he could not penetrate. Elias was unraveling, thread by thread, undone not by rebellion he could see, but by defiance that thrived in what he could not hear. By autumn, Elias's iron discipline was fraying like rotted rope. He had built his world on control, on ritual precision, but now his days bled into chaos. The household servants whispered of his wild tempers, his sudden absences from meals, the way he muttered to himself when he thought no one listened. Most dangerous of all, his mistakes began to show. One evening, when he descended with the food, Anna noticed the lantern swinging too violently in his grip. His hands shook as he unlocked the cellar door, and for the first time he dropped a key. It struck the stone floor, ringing like a bell. Elias cursed, snatched it up, and shoved the tray toward them with unnecessary force, but the moment was not lost on Anna. She etched the sound of that dropped key into memory. Another night, Margaret observed the way he lingered after setting down the bread. He stood in the shadows longer than usual, his breathing uneven, as if waiting for them to speak. But they said nothing. His silence was answered with silence, and Elias retreated up the stairs more quickly than before, his boots clattering like a man fleeing rather than ruling. The sisters whispered after the door locked. "He fears us now," Margaret said. "That is why he waits. He needs proof he is still master." Anna nodded. "And every time we deny him, the cracks grow." They began to test those cracks. When Elias demanded they eat in front of him, they obeyed with a mechanical calm, chewing slowly, eyes fixed on him as if he were the one under inspection. When he barked questions, they answered only with measured stillness, never defiance, but never surrender. It was a performance, a mirror that made him confront his own unraveling. Elias, blind to the trap, grew harsher. He left the lantern burning longer, wasting oil, pacing like a restless predator. He struck the walls with his cane to fill the silence, but the SSIESting ters did not startle. Each overreaction, each wasted ounce of fury was a victory for them, though he could not see it. What Elias had not realized was this: the moment he dropped that key, the balance shifted. For years, the cellar had been their cage. Now, every tremor in his hand, every mistake, was proof the bars were weakening. And in the blackness after the lantern died, Anna whispered the words that lit their secret fire. "He thinks we are trapped here, but it is he who is trapped, with us." Sleep abandoned Elias. Nights stretched into endless vigils where he stalked the hallways, lantern clutched in a trembling fist. His reflection in the window glass startled him. His own eyes looked hollow, feral, like a man haunted. The silence of the cellar had followed him upstairs. It was no longer contained. He swore he heard footsteps padding softly behind him when the house was still. At times he caught the faint sound of girls' laughter, low, mocking, as if carried through the beams of the floor. When he tore open the cellar door in a fury, he found them sitting silently as always, calm, unblinking, unbroken. Their composure taunted him. One evening, as he paced the corridor, he saw Margaret standing at the far end, her face pale, her eyes burning. He staggered toward her, but the figure dissolved into shadow before he reached it. His chest heaved, sweat dripped down his temple. "Tricks," he muttered, "tricks of the mind." Yet the fear in his voice betrayed him. Down in the cellar, Anna and Margaret felt the shift. They heard him fumbling the locks with clumsy hands, heard the uneven cadence of his boots above their heads. "He is breaking," Anna whispered in the dark. "He sees ghosts." Margaret, her face still bruised, whispered back, "Good. Let the ghosts in. They will do what we cannot." But Elias fought against the phantoms. He doubled his punishments, pacing their cell with wild eyes, insisting they confess their rebellion. Though they had done nothing, he demanded they admit to whispering in the night, to plotting against him, to summoning shadows into his home. His cane struck the stone floor again and again, sparks flying. "You think you can unmake me?" he roared, but his voice cracked, ragged, stripped of certainty. The sisters stared back in silence, and Elias felt his rage curdle into dread. In their stillness, he no longer saw children. He saw judges, witnesses, a tribunal of two that measured and found him wanting. The master of the cellar had begun to feel like its prisoner, and as he locked the door behind him, his hand shaking so violently the keys clattered, Elias muttered words no one else had ever heard from his lips. "They're not afraid anymore. God help me, they're not afraid." The cellar had been meant as a place of order, a fortress of silence he alone commanded, but now silence mocked Elias. It no longer obeyed him, it echoed him, twisted him, fed him visions. He began to dream while awake. The boundaries between past and present, between memory and flesh, collapsed like rotten beams. At the dinner table he looked up from his plate and saw Anna seated across from him, dressed in white, her eyes too old for her face. He blinked, and the chair was empty. Another night he woke to find Margaret at his bedside, whispering words he could not understand. Her lips moved soundlessly, and when he reached for her throat, his hand grasped nothing but air. The sheets were damp with sweat. His own heartbeat thundered louder than any voice. By day, his ledger books betrayed him. The names inside, once neat columns of order, shifted before his eyes. The sisters' names appeared in ink, where none had been written. Anna, Margaret, over and over, scrawled in a hand too much like his own. He tore the pages, burned them in the hearth, yet when he opened another book, the names returned, multiplying like a curse. Meanwhile, below in the cellar, Anna and Margaret noticed the change. His visits grew shorter, more erratic. Sometimes he left food and forgot to lock the door until a minute later, as if catching himself mid-daze. Other times, he arrived muttering half-formed prayers, his lantern held too close to his face, the flame throwing monstrous shapes across the stone walls. Margaret whispered, "He is unraveling. The cellar is no longer ours alone. It has spread into him." Anna's reply was colder. "Good. The prison he built is inside him now." The more Elias tried to reassert control, the more reality slipped. He struck the walls as if punishing them. He shouted confessions at the sisters, words they had never spoken. "You wanted me to die. You cursed his house. You brought the shadows." His cane clattered to the floor, forgotten. His voice trembled into sobs. And when silence answered him yet again, Elias broke. He sank to his knees before his captives, whispering like a child afraid of the dark. "Tell me I still have them. Tell me they still fear me." But no answer came, only the sound of his own breath, shallow and desperate, filling the space he had once believed he ruled. The spiral quickened. Elias no longer visited as a man of authority, but as something wild, unstable. His lantern swung madly in the darkness, throwing grotesque shapes across the cellar walls. His face, once stern and composed, was now drawn and haggard, the skin beneath his eyes bruised with sleeplessness. He raved at shadows, striking the walls with his cane until splinters flew. "I hear you," he barked into the stones. "I know what you whisper when I'm gone." His voice cracked into laughter, jagged and hollow. He turned to the sisters, pointing a trembling finger. "You think silence protects you, but silence speaks louder than screams." Margaret kept her posture rigid, though her pulse hammered in her throat. Anna, sharper in instinct, noticed his other hand, the hand gripping the keys, shake so violently that one slipped loose and dangled precariously from the ring. Elias's hallucinations grew more dangerous. He accused them of summoning spirits, of turning the house against him. At one point he lunged at Anna, clutching her wrist with white-knuckled fury, his face inches from hers. "Admit it," he spat, his breath sour. "Admit you brought them here." But Anna did not flinch. She stared straight into his fevered eyes and whispered, "You brought them yourself." The words struck harder than any blow. Elias recoiled, stumbling back as though burned. For a fleeting instant, his gaze darted upward, as if expecting to see something looming above him, something only he could summon. He dropped his cane, clutching his temples, muttering prayers to a god he had long since abandoned. The sisters exchanged a glance in the heavy silence that followed. For the first time, Anna's whisper carried more than defiance. It carried intent. "He is not only weak," she breathed to Margaret once the door locked. "He is dangerous. Each day he frays further. And soon, his madness will too, turn fully against us." Margaret's eyes glistened in the dim light. "Then what do we do?" Anna's hand tightened around hers. Her answer came soft but sharp as a blade. "We stop waiting. We prepare." Above them, Elias staggered through the hallways, his lantern swinging, muttering to himself like a man already half dead. He thought the sisters still belonged to his silence, but now the silence belonged to them. The cellar was no longer just a cage. It had become a classroom. Every mistake Elias made was a lesson. Every slip of the keys, every uneven breath, every muttered word of madness carved itself into Anna and Margaret's memory. They began to notice patterns. Elias's visits came at unpredictable hours now, but his paranoia made him repeat certain gestures. He checked the locks twice, sometimes thrice, fumbling as though unsure of his own hands. He often left the lantern burning longer than he should, its flame sputtering low by the time he retreated upstairs. And more than once, he forgot to slide the bolt immediately, only remembering after a long pause, when the sisters could hear his boots pacing above, hesitation in each step. Margaret, patient and watchful, whispered the details in the dark. "The third key on the ring is the one for the cellar. He always fumbles it first." Anna, quick and daring, added her own observation. "When his hands shake, he drops the ring lower. If we can make him drop it again." Her voice trailed off, but the fire in her tone was unmistakable. Their silence had been their weapon, but now it became their cover. They whispered plans only when certain he could not hear. They rehearsed movements in their minds, how fast Anna could lunge, how quickly Margaret could conceal. Every moment Elias mistook their stillness for submission. They built a strategy behind it. And yet, they knew patience was essential. He was volatile, unpredictable. To act too soon would mean death. They needed him weaker still, unraveling further, until his fear outweighed his strength. Above them, the house itself began to change. Servants quit in quiet fear, whispering of voices in the night, of the master's footsteps at all hours. Doors slammed without wind. Lamps burned out too quickly. The mansion had taken on the sickness of its keeper. One evening, Elias descends, dead with food, and nearly dropped the key again. This time, Anna's fingers twitched, ready to strike, but Margaret caught her wrist under the shadows and shook her head. Not yet. The moment would come, but not this night. As the lantern went out, Margaret whispered their vow. "We endure." And Anna, her voice sharper than ever, added a new line. "We endure until we escape." By winter, Elias was no longer master of the house. He was its ghost. The servants had all gone, leaving the great halls echoing with emptiness. Windows collected frost. Doors creaked in their frames, and the silence he had once forced upon others now consumed him. One night, shaking and muttering, Elias descended into the cellar not as a ruler, but as a fugitive. He carried the lantern close, his eyes darting to the corners as though the shadows themselves stalked him. The sisters sat where they always sat, still, waiting. But Elias did not leave after setting down the food. Instead, he slid the heavy bolt across the door from the inside. The metallic scrape rang through the stone chamber like a verdict. Elias turned to them, his face gaunt, his lips trembling. "The house," he whispered. "It's not safe. Only here. Only down here we are protected. The shadows want me. But if I keep you close, they cannot take me." Anna and Margaret exchanged a look. The realization struck like thunder. He had locked himself inside with them. The lantern flame wavered, throwing his features into grotesque distortion. He paced, muttering, "They whisper above the floors. They write your names in my books. They walk the halls at night. But here you are silent. Here I am safe." Safe. The word sounded wrong in his mouth, like a child begging for comfort. His shoulders hunched, his steps faltered. He was no longer the man who had struck and threatened. He was a prisoner of his own terror, desperate, cornered. Anna's breath quickened. Margaret's hand found hers in the shadows. They had waited for a moment like this. for him to collapse inward, to turn his fortress into his tomb. And as Elias set the keys down on the stone ledge, his hands shaking too violently to hold them steady, Anna's eyes locked on them with a fire that was no longer just defiance. It was destiny. The lantern sputtered, its flame shrinking to a thin, trembling wick. The cellar breathed with shadows. Elias crouched in the corner, clutching his temples, rocking like a child lost in nightmares. The keys sat on the stone ledge, gleaming faintly in the dim light, forgotten by the hand that once guarded them with iron will. Margaret's gaze lingered on Elias, not with pity but with clarity. This was not the master of their prison. This was a hollow man, broken by his own cruelty, undone by the silence he had worshipped. She touched Anna's arm. "Now," she whispered. Anna moved first. Her steps were deliberate, soundless. She reached for the keys with steady hands, her pulse thundering in her ears. Elias stirred, his bloodshot eyes lifting. For a moment their gazes locked. "You can't," he rasped. His voice was thin, desperate. "If you leave, the shadows will follow. We're bound, you and I. This house, this silence, it owns us all." Anna's hand tightened around the keys. Margaret rose to her side, her bruised lips set in defiance. "No," she said, her voice ringing clear in the damp chamber. "It only owned you." The sisters turned toward the door, fitting the third key into the lock. The bolt groaned as it slid, the sound louder than any scream. Behind them, Elias scrambled to his knees, his voice breaking into a shriek. "Don't leave me here! Don't leave me with them!" But the sisters did not look back. The lantern died. Darkness swallowed the cellar. The heavy door creaked open, spilling a pale slice of moonlight onto the stone floor. For the first time in years, fresh air touched their skin, carrying the scent of frost and freedom. Elias's cries rose behind them, frantic, echoing through the chamber he had once ruled. But the sisters stepped through the door together, the silence no longer a prison but a shield. And as the door closed with finality, the last suo, and the sisters heard was Elias's voice dissolving into the dark, pleading, raving, swallowed by the very silence he had built. The legacy of fear ended not with chains, but with choice. They had endured, they had escaped,